let's do it. So how do you find the maximum or the minimum of a graph? And this is the most fundamental technique in all of calculus right here, even though we talk a lot about slope and what all that means, but this is the main technique that we're going to do over and over. So how do you find, if you're given a graph and you'd like to find, that flat spot or this flat spot, or maybe even that flat spot, how do you find it? You take the derivative and you set it equal to 0. Because for each of these flat spots, you know for sure that the slope is 0 there, and the slope is 0 there, and the slope is 0 here. And each of these points, I call them flat spots because I think that's a nice word. It's a flat spot. What they really call them is critical points. So it's a critical point, which in and of itself sounds interesting, like critical. But I call it a flat spot. So all those flat spots you can find by just taking the derivative, setting it equal to 0, and then you have to do some algebra, right? You either do the quadratic formula or the factor or maybe some other technique, but that's our main technique, is take the derivative, set it equal to 0. Okay, second question, when do you use the chain rule? When do you use the chain rule? None? Yeah, when you have a composition function, and what does that look like? Because they're not necessarily going to tell you f of g of x. You're just going to look at a function, and what are you going to see that's going to make you say, oh, hey, I'm going to do a chain rule? What would make you think, oh, I'm going to do a chain rule? Exactly. I mean, as soon as you see an inside function and an outside function, then automatically that's a chain rule. So in this particular problem, I have my outside, which is the something to the 10th, and then I have my inside, which is the 3x plus 7, and so that tells me it's a chain rule because I'm looking at an inside function and an outside function. And then you do the chain rule, which is you take the derivative of the outside, leave the inside alone, multiply by the derivative of the inside. Okay. Oh, that was my next question. How do you verbalize the chain rule? Okay, then next, what is the definition of marginal cost, marginal revenue, and marginal profit? So what does that word marginal mean anyway? Yeah, the very next one. So let's clarify. If I wanted the cost of 801 items, I would just go ahead and plug in 801 into the cost function. That would tell me the cost of all 801 items. So that's all 801 items. Whereas if I wanted the marginal cost of the 801st item, then I'm just talking about the actual 801st item itself. And that's going to be the cost of all 801 items minus the cost of the first 800 items. And that way I'm subtracting out the cost of the first 800 items, and I'm just leaving behind the cost of the 801st item. So now this right here is the actual definition of marginal that you subtract out your two, to get whatever number you want. And you can do that with profit and revenue. So same thing would be if I had marginal profit of the 801st item, then I'd be looking at the profit of 801 items minus the profit of 800 items. And then it would work the same way with revenue. So marginal revenue of the 801st item would be the revenue of all 801 items minus the revenue of just 800 items. So all of those are the actual definition of marginal, whereas calculus gives us a slightly faster way of computing all of that. If you just want the marginal cost of some particular item, again, I'll say 801, then you just do a cost derivative, and then you plug in 801. So the definition of marginal in calculus is just the derivative. So if you take the derivative, that's automatically going to give you the marginal cost. Or if you want the marginal profit of 801, then you just take the derivative of profit and plug in 801. Or if you want the marginal revenue of 801, of the 801st item, you just do the derivative of revenue and plug in 801. Okay, so that's marginal. And I think I mentioned this, that I had a question or two like this on the test, but then I decided not to grade it and hold it against anybody. So there's a question on the test that was about this. I didn't take any points off for whatever answer you gave, but you will see it again on future tests, and in that case, then I will grade it. By the way, I will give you all back your test back today, so you're going to see that at the end of class. Okay, does anyone have any questions before we go? All right, so where are we? Today is February 9th today, so we're going to start section 2.6 today. That is as soon as we finish 2.5b. We had a couple problems left again, 2.5b. which means you do not have to have 2.5B due tonight. Of course, by all means, by the time class is over today, you'll be able to do all of 2.5B. If you want to go home and finish it today, you can't get it out of the way. But I'll bump that due date to next week. And then we'll start 2.6 today. Anything else? We have a good chunk of time until our next test, and then we'll have spring break. Did I already tell you the walk into a bar trip?
Yes.
Okay. So, where do hardcore kids go camping? Intense! Hey, that was a nice reaction there. You get it, like intense, like intent. Okay. All right. So then, where did we leave off, folks? Did we leave off at number 13, or did we finish 13? I don't recall which one we left off.
14.
Oh, good. We're on 14. Great. So in number 14, it says, suppose a product's revenue function is given by that. Find an expression for the marginal revenue function. Simplify it and record your results. Be sure to use proper variable in your answer. Okay, well, this is fairly simple. All I want is an expression for marginal revenue. So now we all know, in terms of calculus, what's our expression for marginal anything? It's just a derivative. Right, so this is a very simple question. They're saying that if the revenue function as a function of q is negative 5q squared plus 400q, then the derivative of that, r prime of q, would just be what, negative 10q plus 400? And that's it. So that is your marginal revenue. And if you wanted to write something in front of it, you could say marginal revenue is r prime of q. That's all they asked us to do in that problem, eh? They didn't ask us to plug anything in. So let's see, number 15. Oh, good. A nice long problem. Isn't it nice when there's a nice long problem? All right. So this is the last one, right? Okay, good. For this packet. All right. All right. So the function p of x gives the profit when x units of a certain product are sold. So that is our profit function. Really good idea always would be to go ahead and make a quick little graph. I always recommend that you make a quick little graph of any function that you're dealing with, just to have a better intuitive feeling for what's happening. So in this case, our profit function is a parabola and it's upside down, so we're guessing it looks something like that. That's my go-to. I just make an upside down parabola. It gives me something to think about. But really, what should I probably do? Plug it into Desmos and actually see for sure? Because I don't really know where that maximum is. It could be over here. It could be on the y-axis. I'm not really sure until I try graphing it. So how would I do that? Likewise for you, you're sitting around doing your homework or looking at a function, you would bust out your graphing calculator and take a look. And as soon as you graph it, you realize it doesn't show up. You got to zoom out quite a bit, find your function. Oh, there it is. And I have to fix my window. Make my window from 0 to. Oh, there we go. That's not bad. And since we're talking about products, I can probably just start at 0, open it at -10, and go up to only 500. Ah, there we go. That's a nice little graph. That is certainly different from what I drew. Significantly different, you'll notice, because I actually have x-intercepts, which tells us something interesting. So let's redraw our graph and include the x-intercepts 10 and 340. So let's do that again and include the x-intercepts 10 and 340. My graph is actually kind of hilarious. Like, this is my profit function. Notice, how much profit do I make by selling nothing? A good amount, right? I mean, that's hilarious. That's a real joke in and of itself. All right, so let's try that again. I said from 10 to 340. This is also interesting because that states that I have to sell 10 items to do what? What happens if I just sell 10? Yeah, I don't make anything. I broke even. And same thing, if I sell 340 items, I broke even. Should I sell more than 340 items? No, definitely not. Call it a day. It would be done. But I shouldn't even sell 340 items. I should probably stop here. Right? That's obvious. Stop there. Well, where would that be? Since it's a parabola, can I just assume that it's halfway between 10 and 340? So take the average, 10 plus 340 is 350, divide by 2 is 175. So now I know my maximum profit is 175, not it?
To make it easier, to use negative b over 2a.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can just do negative b over 2a. So negative b over 2a, which would be, what, negative 875 divided by 5? Did that come out to be the same answer, 175? Okay, good. So yeah, you can always use the vertex formula. That's just fine. So do I even have any motivation to sell more than 175 products? Not really, unless I'm interested in market share or just having my name out on the street, people talking about me. I probably want to stop right there. Okay, so see, we haven't even done anything yet. We've had a really nice conversation. We've really looked at the function. We've understood what's happening. Now, what else is the y-intercept? What's the y-intercept? I mean, we don't know what the number is. We can just pretend. I'm just going to say it's negative 1,000. But what does that represent? Yeah, exactly. So my $1,000 is my sunk cost, right? I invested $1,000 into this company, or those are my costs, and now from here on in, I can just start making money. Okay, so what do I want to know? The profit when 90 units are sold. What do we do? Just plug in 90. Remember, anytime you have a function, you can either plug something into the function or set it equal to something. And since 90 is units, then obviously we're plugged the 90 in because they tell us that x is x units. Okay, so you plug in 90. Does anyone have that number for us? $50,000 on the dot. Wow, $50,000 on the dot. All right. So now take a look. Because now I know that I'm talking about 90, that's about here. And so now I know that's about there. 50,000. Did someone else get 50,000 as well? Not that I don't trust Nanda, but it's nice to have two people say it. Yeah, okay, great. So you'll also notice that right now, 90, my slope is positive. That means this is a good approach. I want to keep selling. So long as the slope of my profit function is positive, I want to keep selling. Okay, now what's the average profit per unit when 90 units are sold? It's a very different question. Average profit. How do we find average profit? Yeah? Yeah, exactly. We would want to divide it by 90 units, right? So it'd be P of 90 divided by 90. Does everyone agree that's how an average works? If you have 5 test scores and you want to average them, you add them all together and divide by 5. And right now there's the profit of 90 units, so you add all the profit together and then divide by the number of units. So now we would just do 50,000 divided by 90, which is what? Okay, 555. So there we go. So we're making on average $555 per unit. All right. So far that's simple. That's not calculus. That's just plugging numbers into functions. This next question is calculus. We want to find the rate that profit is changing when 90 units are sold. The rate that profit is changing. What does that even mean? It's what? Yeah, the rate of change. So what do we want to find? Yeah, slope is a good way of saying it. Rate of change always means derivative. If you see the word rate of change, or the rate that profit is changing, the rate that cost is changing, they're always talking about the derivative. So they want to know the rate that profit is changing, not average profit, just profit. So the rate that profit is changing, they're referring to P prime. And so we go ahead and just take the derivative. So what would that be? Negative 5x plus 875x? No, plus 875. So that's the rate that profit is changing right there. And then when Q is 90, so P prime of 90 is equal to negative 450 plus 875. Is that $425? All right. So now what does that mean? Remember, anytime you do a derivative, this is a slope. So I can put that over 1, and we can try to interpret that. Profit, the unit on the y-axis is dollars, so that's $425. And the denominator is the x-axis, because it's always rise over run, so the x-axis is units. So now how do we interpret that information? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So by the time you've sold your 90th unit, okay, right then, you made $425 in profit on that unit. Because remember, P prime is also marginal profit. So all of these things mean the same thing. The rate that profit is changing is the derivative. The derivative is marginal profit, which means that that 90th item, you made $425 of profit right then on that one. Which is interesting because the problem before it, we found that the average profit was, when 90 units are sold, was that. Yeah. Yeah, so you'll notice the two values are different. Okay, so that's what we found out so far. When you sell all 90 units, you make $50,000 in profit. The average profit per item was $555, but the actual 90th item, you only actually made $425 in profit for that particular item. Okay, and then finally, the rate that profit changes on average when the number of units sold rises from 90 to 180. So the rate that profit changes on average. What do you think we should do here? Now see, this one's tricky because they're using very similar words. This was the rate that profit is changing, and here it says the rate that profit changes. Well, that's a nice guess, sir. It could be the derivative of the derivative. It's not, but that was a very fine guess. We're still talking about rate of change, so we are still doing a slope, just the first slope. Yeah. What? Oh, okay. Well, here, let me get the. Let's see what Josh had to say first.
So since it's going to 180, would it be P5 over?
P prime of 180 divided by P prime of 90?
No. P5 over divided by.
Well, that would be the average something at 180. Another fine guess, not it. We want to know the rate of change on average. Now, that's actually the key word there, on average. And we are specifically saying from 90 to 180. And you'll notice 180 is just past the maximum. So we're saying to find the average rate of change from 90 to 180, what does that imply that we want to find? Yeah, the secant slope. This one we're looking for the secant slope. That really only became obvious when we actually looked to see what coordinates we were looking at from 90 to 180. And the fact that we want the average rate of change, that would imply a secant rate of change. So that was not at all obvious. You know, we're teasing out language here as we go, figuring out what these words mean. But here they definitely do just want average rate of change. And you'll recall that if you want to find the secant slope on an interval from A to B, remember we used the formula f of b minus f of a all over b minus a? That was our secant slope. So we can do the same thing here, where we're going to say the rate that profit changes on average would be P of 180 minus P of 90 all over 180 minus 90. So this is just to remind you that that was our general secant slope formula. Okay, Henry, what was your question?
Well, if the profit change is 425
at 90 units,
like the highest, because you can see on the curve, right, that it's going up.
Yeah, this slope right there was 425 over 1. So yeah, that slope is there, whereas our secant slope is now a little less steep. So we would expect an answer now that's going to be what, more or less than 425. The slope is less steep. Yeah, a little less. But was that even your question? What was your question?
Well, so if that's like the profit, like the change,
Yeah.
the rate of profit change.
Yeah.
And then the average, how can the average profit be more? Like none of the profit values greater than that.
Yeah, you know what? I was thinking that myself when we were looking at those numbers, and it wasn't exactly making sense to me. If we plugged in, we all agreed though that it was 50,000. More than one person can do that, and then we're dividing that by 90, the average profit. Yeah, $555. And yet when we plugged in -5 times 90 plus, it's in 5. Yeah, that turned out to be 425.
Because that's the highest amount of profit at that point, so the average being more.
Well, here's the answer to the question. How much profit did we actually make at 90?
That's how much more you made than the last.
Yeah, that's how much more you made than the last one. That doesn't actually mean how much you actually made right there. If we actually did the P of 90 minus P of 89, let's look at that. P of 90 minus P of 89, then that actually is literally the profit you made on the 90th item. But that's still different from, say, yeah, the average profit from 90. Yeah. We haven't answered your question right. Yeah. I see what you're saying. The rate that it's changing.
We can acknowledge it's weird.
Well, yeah, but we want to go past just that it's weird. Like, for instance, the rate that profit is changing here, because it's so much steeper, imagine right here, the rate that profit is changing, it's very steep. So it's going to be a huge number, like M equals 900. And that's just the rate at which profit is changing per item. Whereas, you know, here by now it's 425, and by the time you get up to the very top, probably the item before 175 or 174, maybe the profit change would only be like $5. Maybe $5 on that. So yeah, those tangent slopes are changing all the time. But the fact is that if out of 90 items you made 50,000.
Well, that means that everything preceding 425 is higher. I was assuming it was lower. So maybe that's why the average is higher.
Yeah, because yeah, this is just the rate that it's changing. And anybody else want to chime in on the seeming discrepancy?
Seems, right? Because, like I said, at bottom of the graph on the left, since it's a whole lot more steeper than it is at mean, and all the values.
Yeah, I agree. I haven't done this one yet. Let's look and see how much money we actually made on the 90th one. What is it?
427.5.
Okay, so the actual is 427.5. Yeah, but the fact is, the fact is the amount of profit you're getting is slowing down. It was bigger before. Okay, that answers your question. Did it click? It clicked for me too. Does that make sense now? Why? Okay, yeah, because if you look at that item, you're only making $5. And obviously the average is much higher because over here, you had a much higher profit margin than each one. Okay, so then how about this one, folks? Did anyone finish this one? Let's get those numbers then. Obviously the denominator is 90. And so we have to do P of 180 minus P of 90. So, negative. So if we're at 68,000, well, minus the P of 90 we already had previously, that was 50,000. And so that gives us 18,000 over 90, which is 200. Did anyone else get 200? Okay, so that secant slope is 200. So the average slope from the 90th product to the 180th product, on average, we're changing at $200 more profit per item. $200 more profit per item. So keep in mind, every time we calculate a slope, which is a derivative, which is a slope, we're automatically talking about marginal. That is the amount of profit per item. Either on average, so this $200 was an average of $200 of profit for every item between 90 and 180. Whereas when we did the actual marginal with the derivative, that 90th item itself got $425 of profit.
Where did you get the 68,000?
I plugged 180 into the profit.
Into the negative?
Yeah, the original profit. Did anyone else get 60,000? On your calculator? Yeah. I'm looking at the formula. I believe I typed that in correctly. Which makes sense. Yeah, because this one right here is 50,000. And this one's going to be higher, so 60,000 is relatively high. Yeah, just try typing it in again. Was it seeing that's correct? Okay, then the last question, the number of units sold when profit stops increasing and starts decreasing. Now notice that's just a really cute way of saying something. The number of units sold when the profit stops increasing and starts decreasing. What happens at the moment that you stop increasing and start decreasing? Where are you at? Yeah, you're at the flat spot. You're at the critical point. So all they're really saying is find how many units that led to the maximum. So this tool that we're going to use over and over again, you take the derivative and set it equal to 0. And let's all make sure that we can interpret what that means. The derivative refers to the slope. And what we're saying is I want to know when the slope is 0. And 0 slope means a horizontal line, which means a flat spot, which is either a maximum or a minimum or a transition point. So we go ahead and take that derivative, which I think we already did. It's negative 5x plus 875. Set that equal to 0, a tiny bit of algebra. And as we already knew, it was 175. Yeah, didn't we calculate that earlier? Oh, yeah, because we used, Nando suggested we use the vertex formula. And did you all notice, when you actually do this algebra, do you see that the numbers at negative 875 over negative 5 is exactly what Nando had suggested we do with the vertex formula? I've got a negative sign. There. Do you think that's just a coincidence? That the vertex formula had the exact same numbers as doing the problem algebraically by setting the derivative equal 0? What's that? Well, what do y'all think? Is it a coincidence or by design? Yeah, does anyone want to see something really, really cool? I mean, really cool. You're going to go home and tell your friends about this one. If you have the function ax squared plus bx plus c, that's any quadratic in the universe, right? And you want to know where's the flat spot. So what would we do? Take the derivative, which is going to be 2ax plus b, and we want to set that derivative equal to 0. And so now we just have this tiny bit of algebra to do. Move the b over, 2ax equals negative b, and then divide up to 2a. And what do we get? And negative b over 2a is the vertex formula. Yeah, isn't that neat? So the vertex formula pops right out of the idea of taking derivative, setting equal to 0, and it automatically will tell you what the vertex is. All right, folks. That problem was dense. There were a lot of concepts in it. That'd be well worth, printing that problem out again on a separate sheet of paper and doing them all again from scratch and making sure you get the same answers. Making sure that you interpret the problems the same way each time. Okay. Any other questions you'd like to ask about that chunk? All right. Well, let's now talk briefly about these ideas that we're going to get into in the second part of chapter 2. So in the first part of chapter 2, we learned how to take a derivative. We learned how to distinguish between tangent slope and secant slope, and taking a derivative according to the power rule, or by doing the difference quotient. Oh my goodness. So let's just talk about some differences between what we'll see in chapter 2a versus chapter 2b. So in chapter 2a, we did slope of secant tangent, we did limits, we did continuity, the difference quotient, the derivative and formula for derivatives, and then applications of business. So those are all the things we looked at so far. So in chapter 2b, which, sorry, that's sections 1 through 10, it'd be sections 5 through 10, we'll learn about taking the second derivative. So the derivative of the derivative, what that means, and how to find and apply the first and second derivative to solve problems. So for the whole next chunk of class, we're going to talk about the second derivative. I'll throw a question out right now so you think about it. When we set f prime of x equal to 0 and solve for x, what are we finding? Yeah, critical points or flat spots, right? So when we solve this, we're looking for flat spots. So I'm just going to throw this out for your brain to think about it. What if we solve this? What would we be solving for? If you take, what's that? Well, correct. You're finding the flat spots of the derivative of the derivative. Oh wait, no, yeah, you're right. The flat spots of the derivative. Yeah, very well said. If you take the second derivative, then you're looking at the flat spots of the derivative function. That's correct. And then what would that represent? But this is the way we're going, is that we're interested in all three of these questions, actually. What are we even finding when we set f of x equal to 0? Yeah, that's right, the x-intercepts. So we're going to be interested in all three of these. We just don't know what the third one is yet. But if you set the function equal to 0, you get x-intercepts. If you set the derivative equal to 0, you get flat spots. And if you set the second derivative equal to 0, you get something else. It's interesting. It's an interesting feature of the graph. So yeah, so we're leading into taking second derivatives, and what does that mean? And so here's the question. What information do each of the following notations tell us? And so you already know what f of x tells us. What is it? Well, that's if you set it equal to 0, it's the x-intercept. F of x in and of itself is just the y value or the height. Yeah, the height, it's the y value, it's the y coordinate, it's the output of a function. So like if it's a profit, then the output is profit. If the function is revenue, the output is revenue. If the function is cost, the output is cost. But yeah, it's the height of the function, it's the height of the graph, it's the y value of the graph. What does that prime tell us? Slope. And again, you know, we just basically distinguish between positive slopes or zero slope or negative slopes. We don't do much about undefined slopes, yeah, asymptotes. I mean, there's, you know, we still are aware of them. But really, if we're talking about revenue or profit, we're very much interested in these three possibilities. Profits going up, profits flat, or profits declining. Okay, so then what is f double prime? And that's how we say it, f double prime or second derivative. What is that going to tell us? It's not necessarily going to tell you where the asymptotes are. No. Now, Nanda, I think you know the answer, right? So wait 1 second. Anyone want to try to give this a shot? To tell you the truth, I don't know that you can necessarily just walk your way there. But it is fortunately a very simple concept, and it's something that's visually recognizable. Just like a flat spot is visually recognizable, the second derivative is also recognizable. It's something about how curvy it is. Yeah, absolutely.
The rate of change.
Well, and it is talking about the rate of change of the rate of change. So I like that one. We're talking about if this is the function and this is the rate of change, this is the rate of change of the rate of change. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so what is the second derivative now? Concavity. So everyone make a note somewhere, wherever you want to, but it's concavity. Now, that doesn't mean that you ate too much sugar and didn't brush your teeth, right? Concavity. Although it is true that you get a cavity when you have concavity in your molar, right? The more concave your tooth is, the more of a pit there is for sugar and bacteria to sit in there and then, you know, eat away your tooth, and then you get a cavity. So concavity is this idea where I'm going to draw a couple pictures here. This, like a parabola facing up, this is called concave up. Concave up. And we refer to concave up as being positive concavity. So that's positive concavity. It means that you have a bowl-shaped object, like you eat cereal, and it's facing up. Or you could have concave down. So that's concave down. And we refer to that as negative concavity. One of the things I like to think about with this is, you know, if you've seen a circus, or you've seen movies about a circus, or at least you've read about a circus, you've got the whole idea of a strong man or a strong woman who would take a bar of iron, and it's flat, of course, and then what do they do with that bar of iron? Yeah, they bend it, right? So thinking of a bar of iron, that bar of iron either became concave up, or the bar of iron became concave down. And if the bar of iron is neither concave up or concave down, what is it? Well, not both. I mean, neither. It's just straight, right? So that would be concavity of 0. So zero concavity means that it's not bent, right? Now, something very interesting here, you might look at that and say, oh, well, then the slope is also 0. But that is not true. A line could have 0 concavity, and it could be pointing up with a positive slope. It could be pointing down with a negative slope. It could be pointing sideways with a 0 slope. Each of these straight lines represent 0 concavity. So to say 0 concavity, what you know for sure is that it's not bent. Okay, it's not bent. But it's still open as to whether or not it's a positive slope, a negative slope, or a zero slope. Likewise, if you're concave down, you could be anywhere along that path, right? So this whole shape right here is concave down, but if I'm here, the slope is positive. If I'm here, the slope is zero. If I'm here, the slope is negative. So just knowing that something is concave down, you have no idea yet what the slope is. Just knowing that something is zero concavity, you have no idea yet what the slope is. And even here, just knowing that something is concave up, you have no idea what the slope is depending on where you are. So you could be on a concave up function, but your slope could be negative, or your slope could be zero, or your slope could be positive. So this is a truly independent concept. Concavity is truly independent from slope, because you could come up with something that's concave up, but negatively sloped. Or you could come up with something that's concave down, but positively sloped. And you could have something that's not bent at all with zero concavity, and it could be either positively or negatively or zero sloped. Okay, so this is what the second derivative represents, is concavity. It's how much something is bent. Not,
What if we have, like you said, like it's both, it's almost like a cubic function?
right. So that's a great question. So when we have something that's bent downward, and then it's bent upward. So let's look at this. Right here, on the left, is it concave up or down? On the left, it's concave down. So we would look at this and we'd say, this is concave down, which is negative concavity. Whereas over here on the right, what is it? Concave up. And so this is positive concavity. So what would this point be right here in the smack dab middle? Zero. So right here would be concave zero, because it's a transition point between moving from concave down to then concave up, so that's zero concavity. Now that might feel weird to say that point right there is not bent. But the fact is that point right there is not bent. It's flat. It's like the strong person held it right there and bent this part up and bent this part down, but the part in the middle under their hand didn't get bent. Now what part didn't get bent? Just that one teeny point. Just that one point is not bent. Because as soon as you move to the right, the bar is bent up. And as soon as you move to the left, the bar is bent down. But that point right there was not bent at all. It was not bent up or down. And so this point right here, just like before, we said that the flat spots are called critical points. So critical points are called flat spots. These points are called inflection points. An inflection point is when the concavity is zero. So I'm going to add that in here now to my little list. F prime of x equals 0, those are critical points. Whereas f double prime of x equals 0, those are now inflection points. And what does that mean? An inflection point is when concavity changes, essentially. An inflection point would be where the concavity changes from, say, negative concavity to positive concavity. Or better yet, an inflection point is simply when it's not bent. So if a critical point is where it's flat, an inflection point is where it's not bent. Okay. Henry.
So it's not bent, but it is the derivative graph, right? Or is that of the regular graph?
It's the derivative of the derivative.
So it's the not bent part is on
The not bent part of the original.
of the original.
Yeah, thank you. We're talking about, in all three cases, we're describing the original function. So when you say f prime of x equals 0, those are the flat spots of the original function. And if you take the second derivative and set it equal to 0, those are the not bent parts of the original function. Thanks for clarifying that. That's a good point. Yeah, we're always describing the original function. All right, folks. Yep, so that's our big concept that we're bringing in. Any other questions you want to ask, Henry?
So like in that specific scenario, that inflection also occurs.
Yes, the inflection point here is also a critical point.
And usually if it's just like a max or min, it's not just on anything.
Yeah, like it's interesting. An inflection point doesn't have to be a flat spot. I could theoretically have something that's concave and it goes like that. And if I did that well enough, I hope you all agree that that point, even though it is changing from concave down on the left and concave up on the right, is that point flat? No. It's okay. It's not the very best drawing I've ever done in my life. But my point was to try. Well, here I can do it even better. Everyone will agree that that is not a flat spot. And so what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to go, and I'll go there. Now it's a little more obvious. I'm concave down on the left, and I'm concave up on the right. And that point right there is not zero slope, but it is nevertheless an inflection point. Does that respond to your question? Okay. Okay, great questions. And once again, concavity is independent of slope, because you can see any number of combinations of concavity and slope. And in fact, that's one of the first exercises we're going to do, is exercising our brain to imagine all these different possibilities. Okay, so there we have it. Those are all the ideas: the y-coordinate of the original graph, the slope of the original graph, and the concavity of the original graph. Oh, good. See, I had that in my notes, that we're always talking about the original graph. What are the features of the original graph? We calculate these things to talk about the original graph. Okay, so what does the second derivative tell us? Do I have a question? What does the second derivative tell us? It tells us the concavity of the original graph. It tells us the slope of the derivative graph. And it tells us, in the case of distance versus time, so in terms of distance versus time, if I have a graph, and this is distance, and this is time, and let's just say that you leave your house, and you run away and then come back. Okay, so at any given point on that distance versus time graph, the slope is telling you your speed, whereas the concavity is telling you acceleration. So that's the difference between those guys. So in a distance versus time graph, f of x would be your distance, and f prime of x would be your speed, and f double prime of x would be your acceleration. Okay. And those are just in terms of interpreting. Okay. One more quick thought, just because it's fun. This class just goes up to the second derivative. But I think I've told you that you can take more derivatives. You can take the third derivative, the fourth derivative, and in fact, you can take infinitely many derivatives in a row and get information out of that. Well, just in terms of our natural experience, I want you to think about being on a roller coaster. Okay, so you're on a roller coaster, and maybe you're calculating your distance above the ground. Josh?
So when you calculate more and more
yeah.
Does the information ever repeat itself?
Sometimes it'll loop around on itself, and you'll get the same function over and over. I mean, just think about taking the derivative of e to the x. Take the derivative of e to the x is just e to the x all the way down. Yeah. Okay, so if you're on a roller coaster, on the one hand, your function is telling you your height above the ground. Okay. Your first derivative is telling you how fast you're going on the roller coaster. So you all know what it feels like to just be going fast on a roller coaster? Like you're just, okay, everyone, you're on a roller coaster, you're going fast, and then you're going slow, right? So that's just one experience. But then you also have acceleration. What does it feel like to experience acceleration on a roller coaster? Right? So you know what that feels like, going, whoa. Now, acceleration, though, technically, if you're just accelerating at a constant pace, what you really feel is just that, like you're leaning up against the back of your seat and you're feeling the pressure of like being pushed back against your seat. So that's constant acceleration. There is a third derivative, which actually has a meaning that you can experience, especially on a roller coaster. And the third derivative is when, so remember, rate of change of distance is speed, rate of change of speed is acceleration. The rate of change of acceleration is called jerk. And so that's like, you're already on a roller coaster, you're already being pushed into the back of your seat, and then it accelerates even more, and you're like, ooh! And that's jerk. That'd be your third derivative. I don't know where it would go after that. I mean, if your jerk gets jerked, I don't know what that even means, but you could keep taking more and more derivatives. At some point, maybe the fourth derivative is called bone crushing. I don't know. All right, so we have a lot of concepts here to think about. The concavity of the original graph. These are just notes that I took right out of the textbook just to give us something else to look at. So I hope visually that we're all clear that this is concave up. And again, like a bowl would be concave up, a bowl to liquid. Concave down would be like an umbrella. Okay. Here you can see that a graph can change many times. So here you've got concave up, and then concave down, and then concave up. And what are each of those points called? Where it switches from concave up to concave down, that's an inflection point. And then when it changes from concave down to concave up, inflection point. Theoretically, it can't actually go from concave up to concave up again. That might feel pretty weird, but it is possible that an inflection point could be between two portions of the curve that are going concave up and concave up. It's easy to imagine if, again, you have a strong person, strong woman, or strong man, and they just bend this part up, and then they bend this part up, the part in the middle stayed unbent. So that could still be an inflection point between two portions that are both concave up and up. But normally, an inflection point is when you change from one to the zero. Or sorry, from one to the other. But the definition is just whenever the concavity is zero, which could be from concave up to concave down, or from concave down to concave up, or from concave up to concave up. So you have a lot of different possibilities. Okay. Now, as I'm saying all of these concepts, at any point, I mean, you're all doing great at just raising your hand and stopping me and asking questions. So if you've got something on your mind, please let me know. Okay, concavity of the original graph. I don't think I'm need to go that far. When we talk about concavity, we're now talking about this notation. So it's going to be f double prime, or you can see the notation y double prime, or you can see, instead of dy dx, it'd be d squared y dx squared. So that's another way you might see this notation, d squared f dx squared. So like when you're online doing your homework on the Moore website, they might throw that notation out at you with that notation, that notation. That notation, they all mean second derivative. We'll, for the most part, be using that notation, the f double prime.
Desmos will recognize that probably.
I have no idea what Desmos will do with that. Oh, right, because I did type in dy dx the other day. Huh. Maybe. We'll certainly try it out. What's that? Oh. Okay, so concavity of the original graph. Here's the definition of inflection point. Inflection point is a point on the graph where the function, I'm sorry, I have a function where the concavity of the function changes from up to down or from down to up. To be fair, that definition I think is a little limited. I think an inflection point is any time the second derivative is zero. What? Great, let's talk about this. So, what do we have here? We have a graph, and it says which of the labeled points are inflection points. So let's just kind of move along here. Is point A an inflection point? No, because, well, it's concave up on both sides. The whole thing is concave up. So the answer is probably not. That could still happen if you did the calculation of the second derivative and it was zero, then that's an inflection point. But just looking at it, we would say, no, it's not changing from up to down. So that's going to be like our handy rule in our pocket. It's got to change from up to down. So like point B, is that an inflection point? Yeah, because you're going from concave up to concave down. Like that's a sure thing. If you go from concave up to concave down, it's a sure thing. That's an inflection point. Okay, what about point C? No, that whole thing is concave down. Chances are that's not an inflection point. What about part D? No, because it's still concave down. Point D is within a part of the graph that's all concave down, so that's not an inflection point. Again, visually, to be an inflection point, for sure, it's got to be the transition from up to down or down to up. What about point E? That's concave down over here. This is concave down over here. So did it switch from concave down to up? Yeah, look, kind of looks like a vertex. That's called a cusp. It's called a cusp. And technically, in calculus, there are two parts of a graph that are very undefined that you cannot do a derivative or a second derivative, one of which is an asymptote. So if you have an asymptote, then right there at the asymptote, you cannot define a first derivative or a second derivative. It's undefined. But likewise, if you have a cusp, then it's also, you cannot define the derivative or the concavity. It's undefined. It's not that it's an inflection point, it's undefined. And that makes a lot of sense because, remember, anytime we're talking about slope, you're talking about putting a tangent line, right? So that means that you can, for sure, push your ruler or your pen up against the graph and it will touch at one point, at only one point. Whereas here, a cusp is a teeter-totter. I can theoretically push my pen up against that point, and it could rock back and forth and still only touch it at one point. So there's no well-defined slope at that point. It's a teeter-totter point, and therefore the derivative is not defined. As soon as the derivative is not defined, the second derivative is not defined, the third derivative is not defined. So yeah, so that's not an inflection point, that's not an inflection point, it's undefined. So these are really the two things that are undefined, an asymptote or a cusp, undefined. Okay, so now here, is that an inflection point? No. G, is that an inflection point? Yeah, because they're going from concave down to concave up. H, is that an inflection point? No, at least we have no reason to believe so, because it's not switching from down to up. See, I think that's what they're saying here is that this rule of going from concave up to concave down, visually, you know for sure and you can draw a strong conclusion that it's an inflection point. Really what you need to do is take the second derivative and set it equal to 0, and that's going to tell you all your inflection points no matter what. Okay, Henry? What? Oh. Okay, and I think we're going to talk about this. Yes, we did. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll go and take our break because my phone went off. And then we'll come back, we'll do this little drawing exercise, and then we'll keep going. So the time is 11:53. Let's be back at 12:03. So Henry, you can come take a look at this before I erase it. Hey. Oh, you're not feeling well? Oh, you poor thing. You know, I've heard a lot of people are sick recently. Sounds like it's going around. Well, I hope you feel better and don't infect anyone along the way. Yes, feel free. Yeah, feel free. Did that work? Okay. Oh, okay. All right. All right. So, you all grabbed a sheet as you walked in the room. And this is an exercise to help in visualizing what a graph could look like. At the top, I called it a little sketch. It's a little sketch. And I want us to imagine drawing a graph for a particular x value. So if you'd like, we can always just say that we're looking at x equals 5. So if I draw a graph and I'm looking at x equals 5, what would a graph look like if the y value, so I've got fx, f prime of x, and f double prime of x. So this is my y value, this is my slope, and this is my concavity. Right? And what we're going to do is, first of all, you'll notice how many different possibilities are there. There's a lot of possibilities, and that's just if f of x is 0. So if you turn it over, you'll see the exact same possibilities, but then if f of x is positive or if f of x is negative. But basically, since f prime and f double prime can each have one of 3 possibilities, positive, 0, or negative, you have 3 times 3 times 3, you have 27 different possibilities of plus, minus, and negative. And I just wanted us to try this as a practice. So let's say that we want to know what the graph looks like if the y value is 0. So first of all, that means the coordinate would be on the x-axis. Because if your y value is 0, you're an x-intercept. Now, I want the slope to be positive. So now through that point, I'm going to draw myself a little positive slope indicator. And I want the concavity to be positive. So I'm going to go ahead and make that look concave up. And what we just did there was create a little sketch. Now we basically just know what's happening in the vicinity of x equals 5. Now I totally just chose 5 randomly. But the point is, if all you did was zoom in and just look right there at that part of the graph, then now you know that's the local behavior of the graph. So let's try the next one here. So once again, we're going to say let x equals 5. And if f of 5 was 0, that means it's an x-intercept. If the slope is positive, that means I'll put a little positive slope indicator. But the concavity is negative, then I'm going to make it look like that. So now that's a little sketch of what the behavior of that function is doing locally. Right there at x equals 5. What about this next one? Still, we're just, like I said, 5 is just a random number. If at x equals 5, my function value is 0, that means it's an x-intercept. If my slope is negative, it'd be pointing down. But my concavity is positive, so it looks something like this. That would give me some idea of what the graph is doing right at that point. And again, I call this a little sketch, because you don't know what the whole graph looks like. You're just looking at that teeny little window, that one small part. So about this next one, we know that f of 5 is 0, so that's an x-intercept. And then my slope is negative, and my concavity is negative. So that part of the graph would look something like that. We're just running through all the different possibilities, right? This is just an exercise. It's really an exercise in creativity. It's an exercise in visualizing what a graph looks like. So how about the next one? We have, again, at x equals 5, the function value is 0, so it's an x-intercept. The slope is positive, but the concavity is 0 concavity. So I'm just going to leave it as straight. It's neither concave up nor concave down. Likewise, for the next one, I've got, so again, at x equals 5, my function value is 0, so it's an x-intercept. My slope is 0, So my slope indicator is going to be flat. But my concavity is positive, so that means that that would be a minimum point. What would 0, 0, 0 look like? Yeah, just a straight line. So I know that my actual value of the function is an x-intercept. My slope is 0. My concavity is 0. So it's just completely flat. Now again, we can't draw a conclusion about what happens after we leave. After we leave, who knows what happens. But right then, if you're just zooming in and you're just looking at a very small, well-defined spot in between your hands, you know what's happening right there. What would this one look like? We've got, again, the function value is 0, so it's an x-intercept. The slope is negative, and the concavity is 0. So that means, for all we know, it's just a flat straight line. It's not bent at all. And then the last one, the function value is 0, so it's an x-intercept. The slope is 0, so it's flat, but the concavity is negative, which means that actually that was a maximum value. Okay, I've never done this before. Like, I just made this up last night, and I thought, you know, maybe this would help, because in the past I find that this is something that can be challenging to visualize what's happening in a small region of the point you're looking at. So we won't turn it over to the back, but I encourage you to go try that yourself. I'll just do one of each one with you. So on the back side, you'll just notice that the only thing that changed is the function value itself. So let me just do a couple right here in the middle. I'm going to do, it's a fun one. Ooh, I'll do this one, and I'll do that one. So right here, all right, what's happening? My function value is positive. So where will I put my coordinate? Yeah, up above. So there's my coordinate. I'm looking at this one right here. So my function value is positive, so I just put a point up above the axis. My slope is negative, so I'm going to give us a negative slope indicator. And my concavity is 0, so it's just flat. And that's what it looks like right there at x equals 5. Whereas now I'll do this one. It goes negative 0, positive. So my function value is negative, so where will I put my coordinate? It's down below somewhere. There we go. My slope is 0, so I'll make it flat. And my concavity is positive, which means I know that I must be looking at a flat spot, or a minimum.
Positive is up, right?
Yeah, concavity positive is positive. That's concave. Yeah, now that's a really good point. I think we all know intuitively that's positive slope and that's negative slope. It has to be that, because if you're looking at a stock market, you know, it should be obvious this is when I'm making money and this is when I'm losing money. Right? If you're watching a stock market ticker go up and down, we all know that means you're gaining money and this is where you're losing money. So I think slope is more intuitive, but you know, why is it that that means concave is positive concavity, and this means negative concavity?
Yeah, that would have it would have been like on the other one, it would have been negative.
What do you mean?
Positive, positive.
What do you mean?
Like, you know how like on the first section,
Just show me.
like we would do like negative.
Oh, right, like as we, yeah. So good point. With positive concavity, you're going from negative slope to positive slope, which means overall your slope is increasing. Like, watch my hand. In positive concavity, my slope is increasing. So that's what we mean by positive concavity, is that as time moves on, my slope is increasing. Whereas if you look at negative concavity, what it means is right now I have a positive slope, but as time goes on, my slope is decreasing. So that's another way of thinking about what positive concavity even means. It means that over time, your slope is getting more positive. And negative concavity means that over time, your slope is becoming more negative. Yeah, okay, great. We didn't say that earlier. Really good. That's great, Joseph. Okay, well, folks, that's it. I encourage you to finish drawing all those, just to feel comfortable with making a little sketch in a local area of graph. Otherwise, we're ready to go. We're ready to now dive in. We did a lot of good conceptual exploration right there. Now we get to do some hardcore calculations. Well, okay, maybe not hardcore calculations, but some calculations. Okay, now I hope you all still have that line sheet of paper that has all of your formulas. So I'll go around and call on you folks. Let's start with number one. Everybody have number one? Go ahead and check it. All right. So number one, our function is 7x to the fifth minus 3e to the x. A good question to ask would be, what does it look like, right? I mean, we're talking about concepts that are very visual. They're not only visual. If you were blind, you could still do calculus. If you were aliens that didn't have eyeballs, you could still do calculus. But calculus is nevertheless a very visual thing. So let's look at 7x to the fifth minus 3e to the x. Interesting. Let's fix my window. It appears as though we don't go left very far. We don't go right very far. Ooh, that already looks better. And we don't have to go down very far. That's probably good enough. And we do go up quite a bit. Yikes. All right. That's what our graph looks like. Yep. That's what that looks like. Right? So already we can see some very interesting stuff here. Where's our flat spots? Well, we think right there and right there for sure. Right? Those are two flat spots. What's going on right there, though? Oh, some other points came up. It looks like we have multiple. No? What are those things? Why did Desmos tell me there's other interesting stuff happening right there? What do you suppose is happening right there? It could be wiggling up and down a little bit. How do I know? I would have to change my scale to be able to get in there and really see what's happening. Like here, this is actually down 3. And now I'm down 4, and now I'm back up to 0. So it looks like that went down and then up. And over here, if I'm down at -3, I came up to -2, and then I'm going to go down again. Now this is actually part of the power of calculus, is because if you just saw this graph, you would say, looks pretty flat, right? Whereas if we now change our y value to zoom in quite a bit, I'm just going to go down 1,000 and up 1,000. Okay, that's not enough. I'm going to go down 500, up 500. Whoa, we're starting to see some something interesting. Aha! Now we understand. Was the point I originally said even a flat spot?
No.
Nope. I just was like, oh, it's in the middle, it's a flat spot. That wasn't very wise. Here's my actual flat spot, and here's an actual flat spot. This was an x-intercept, and that was the y-intercept. So, you know, this whole idea of making graphs is very tricky business. You know, you got to be really careful. So now that we've seen all that, now I would zoom out again massively, because I need my y scale to get back to this really tall. So maybe down 10,000 and up 10,000 or another one. There. Oh my. See, now this could be the part that kind of drives people crazy, is finding a good scale. You know, because it is a lot of effort to find a good scale. Okay, so now, and now see those points are so clustered together, it's kind of even hard to see what they are. Okay, so now, where's the flat spot? For sure there, and then there was one to the left and one to the right. Maybe not that far to the right. So how many total flat spots did we have? 3. There were actually like 3 flat spots. One x-intercept, y-intercept, and one way up there. So now that we know what we're kind of looking at, let's make a sketch. Let's make a little sketch. I mean, not a little sketch, we were just doing just a sketch. So I think it went something like, was it down below, and then down, and then up, and back down? Yeah, pretty much. Or was that kind of it? There, so we should have 3 flat spots. And what about concavity? It seems as though we had concave down on the left, and then we had some concave up, and then it switched back to concave down again, didn't it? So we've actually got a lot of things going on this graph. We have a flat spot here, a flat spot here, a flat spot here, but then also our graph is going concave down, and then concave up, and then concave down. So we're being pretty specific here about how we can describe our graph. We have 3 flat spots. We have 3 different chunks of concavity. And so how many inflection points do we have? How many spots does it change from positive to negative or negative to positive? Yeah, so like we have an inflection point there and an inflection point around there. I'm not trying to imply that that inflection point's on the y-axis. I have no idea. I just know that I go from negative concavity, positive concavity, to negative concavity, and somewhere in between there are inflection points. And then we have our flat spots as well. Okay. Everything that we just did was just getting to know the function, like a first date. Hey function, how are you? Where are your curves? Where are your flat spots? Where are your inflection points? So we just kind of have this big picture now. We haven't done the problem. Okay, so now let's go look and see what the problem is. So the first thing, it just says find the first derivative. So the first derivative, pretty straightforward. What's the derivative of 7x to the fifth? And 35x to the fourth? You're like, good, Mr. G, I did this like 5 minutes ago. We already wrote this down. So 35x to the fourth minus, what's the derivative of 3e to the x? Still 3e to the x. Okay, well there we go, so there's that one. And then they're saying f prime of 3. So now all we have to do is plug in 3. Definitely the job of your calculator, 35 times 3 to the fourth minus 3 e to the third. And I got 2774.74 over 1, right? Because it's a slope. So what does that mean then? If I go over on my graph and I look at x equals 3, I'm right around here, right? I'm somewhere on this vastly, very, very steep chunk of the graph. So that's it. That's what I know so far, is that when I'm at x equals 3, I'm on that steeply increasing portion of the graph. Because up 2,700, right, 1 is pretty steep. Okay, now how about the second derivative? What's the second derivative? 35 times 4, is that 140x cubed?
Yes.
Minus still 3e to the x. And so now they're saying, hey, go back and look at that exact same point and tell me the concavity. Well, we can probably all already guess. What is our concavity at 3? I mean, as a guess, I'm guessing negative. I could be wrong, though. I could be wrong. Let's actually plug it in. So we're going to plug in now. 140 times 3 cubed minus 3 e to the 3. And actually, it is positive still. So I must be on this part. So my 3 is still on the increasing portion, but it's part of the positively concave part. I haven't yet reached the negatively concave part. So that kind of tells us where 3 is. Like if I wanted to make a ballpark of where my tick mark for 3 should be, I would put my 3 where the graph is increasing, but I'd move it more towards the left, so I'm still on the positive concavity portion, not on the negative concavity portion. Is that fair? Does that make sense? What are we doing? Now, how did you find this part? Pretty easy, right? I mean, just take the derivative, plug in a number, take another derivative, plug in a number. But this is really what I want you all to be practicing, is thinking about what does the graph look like and what's happening on the graph. So like what we know for sure now is at 3, if I just made a little sketch, if I just kind of started over and I was like, okay, at 3, what's happening? If I plug 3 into the original function, I get a very positive number, so I'd be here. And then my slope was positive, so it looked like that. And my concavity was positive, so it looked like that. And does my little sketch agree with what's actually happening? Yeah, so I could have done the whole thing by just doing a little sketch. I didn't really have to go to Desmos and graph the whole thing. But graphing the whole thing sure was nice, because it gave me a good view of what all was happening. So this is kind of like a global perspective, and then this is just a zoomed in perspective at x equals 3. Yep. So there's that one. How about number 2? For number 2, we would do the exact same thing. We'd say, okay, we have a function. What does the function look like? And then we'd take a look at what they're asking us to do. They say, here's a function, find the derivative, plug in 2. Find the second derivative, plug in 2. So let's try, I'm going to look at Desmos second this time. Let's make a little sketch for ourselves. So first thing I'm going to do is actually find f of 2. Because they didn't ask me to do that, but let's go ahead and find f of 2. That just means plug in 2. So what is that? That's 5 over x and 3 over x squared. So it's 6 plus 5 over 2 plus 3 over 2 squared. as, but I'm building my little sketch right now, so 6 plus 2. My y value is 9.25. So on my little sketch, I go over to x equals 2, and my coordinate is up here at 9.25. Everyone see the beginnings of my little sketch? Okay, so that's where my coordinate is. Now let's find the first derivative. Oh, now this might take a little bit of time. We have to find the first derivative. So first we have to rewrite that, right? We can't take a derivative with x in the denominator. So we have to push all those terms up. So this is really, I'm going to start by writing f of x is really 6 plus 5x to the negative 1 plus 3x to the negative 2. Is that correct? I wrote that in that spot. So f of x is really 6 plus 5x to the negative 1 plus 3x to the negative 2. Remember, we have to rewrite the power function so that it's just x to an exponent. This is part of the process of how it gets worse before it gets better. Now we take the derivative. So what's the derivative of 6? Nothing, yeah, 0. Derivative of 5x to the negative 1 would be negative 5x to the negative 2. And derivative of 3x to the negative 2 would be what? Negative 6x to the negative 3. So my first derivative is actually negative 5 over x squared minus 6 over x cubed. My writing is not lining up with all of this stuff. I just finished finding f prime of x. Now we're going to plug in 2. Right? So now I plug in 2, f prime of 2. So that's negative 5 over 2 squared, which is 4, minus 6 over 2 cubed, which is 8. And overall, do I even need to finish my computation? Is my answer positive, negative, or 0? My answer is going to be negative. By all means, we can go ahead and compute the decimal. We should. Negative 5/4 minus 6/8 is negative 2. And now I can come over to my little sketch, and I know that my slope is negative. So I'm on my way to making my little sketch. My y value is positive. My slope is negative. So now we're going to proceed to find the second derivative. Now to do the second derivative, we're going to go all the way back up to this part. Right? Because this is already written in a way that we can do a derivative on. We don't want to go back to this line because we have to push those exponents, or push the variables back up to the numerator. So we're going to start back up from right here. So now find the second derivative. So you might even want to hold your finger and point so you know you're looking at the right information. What's the second derivative going to be now?
10x.
Yeah, 10x to the negative 3 plus 18x to the negative 4. Okay, now clean that up. Second derivative, that's really 10 over x cubed plus 18 over x to the 4th. Does everyone agree? 10 over x cubed plus 18 over x to the 4th. Now, that's the first thing they asked to do. Well, they asked us to find the second derivative. There it is. And now they're asking us to plug in 2 again. And do we even really have to do any computation? 2 cubed is positive. 2 to the 4th is positive. I've got a positive over a positive plus a positive over a positive. The answer is positive. I don't know what it is, but it's something positive. And so now I already know I can come over here and finish my little sketch. And my concavity is positive. So I give it a little slight positive concavity there. Now, of course, you should still find the answer because more is going to ask you to give the answer. So 10 divided by 248 plus 18 divided by 16. I got 2.375. Yeah. So we just successfully made a little sketch. We know what's happening at x equals 2. It's decreasing, but it's concave up. And the y value is positive. So now, because we're all on the edge of our seat, dying from curiosity, what, Mr. G, what does this graph look like? Right? That's how enthusiastically you're all wondering? Well, that's a weird graph. It looks like a horizontal line with a vertical line. Is that graph correct? No. Our scale is very wrong. Let's go from negative 10 to 10. Ooh. All right, well, that's pretty. So that's what our graph looks like. Now, that's what the overall graph looks like. All right, so you've got a horizontal asymptote to the right and the left, a vertical asymptote going straight up. Oh. But what?
That is a sharp heartbeat.
Yes, it is a sharp heartbeat. You just died, didn't you? That was your heartbeat. Now, what are we interested in? X equals 2. So we zoom in to x equals 2. Where's x equals 2? There it is. And, oh, I had it. It's up to, oh, there we go. Is that the coordinate we drew?
Yes.
Is it at 2, 9.25?
Yes.
And is it negative slope? And is it concave up? Yeah. Well, that was exciting. All right, so that's how we use calculus, the first and second derivative, and the original function to have an idea of what the graph is doing at that point. So again, what we just drew was like that. If we said, I don't care what the rest of the graph looks like, but I'm just curious to know what's happening right there. And that's what we drew. I don't know how else to dress that up in a more exciting way. That's what we're capable of doing now with calculus. Okay, so let's take a look here. So those two problems, they were a little intensive with doing all the calculations. Sometimes the problems are just nice little conceptual things. So let's look at number 3. Not so much happening in number 3. It says, oh, by the way, before we move on, does anyone have any questions about all that? Or about what I mean by making a little sketch? All right, so number 3, the function graphed above is decreasing on the interval. Oh, and the inflection point is at x equals. So first of all, when is the function decreasing? From there to there? Exactly, from -3 to -0.5. So first of all, it's decreasing from -3 to -0.5. Should I use parentheses or brackets? Parentheses, because at the tippy top, it's not decreasing, it's 0 slope. And at the bitty bottom, it's not decreasing, it's 0 slope. I made a phrase bitty bottom, tippy top, bitty bottom. I think you should all use it and we'll get it into Urban Dictionary or maybe into Webster someday. All right, so where's the inflection point? This is just, your guess is as good as mine. So what I would do is I would take your paper and I'd say, well, for sure this is concave down, for sure. And for sure this is concave up. So where's my inflection point? Somewhere in there. Yeah, I mean, somewhere in there is my inflection point. So it's just a matter of kind of guessing now. That is anywhere between, what, maybe -2 and -1.7? So somewhere between -2 and -1.7 is my inflection point. And more, the website will accept any answer within a certain range. So long as you're close, you're going to be right. Now, if we're just guessing, that the program likes whole numbers, I'd probably say the inflection point is at -2. But if you type in -2 and it says, wrong, then change your guess to be more like -1.9. And if that says it's wrong, try -1.8. Because after all, we're just spitballing. Is that a phrase that anyone uses? Spitballing? I wonder why that means to approximate. To approximate something is to spitball. What is that? You like make a spitball and throw it at the wall? Get close. It's what? Yeah, hard to aim, for sure. It's like horseshoes, you're just getting it close. Okay. Well, what's that, Josh?
Horseshoe.
Yeah, horseshoe. All right. Okay, now I think this problem has some real complexity to it. We're going to come back to this. But in fact, let me just quickly look through the rest of the problems and see. Oh, yeah, this one's simple. We're going to do this one first. Let's come back to number 4, okay? Number 5, number 6. Oh, this is a good one. Number 5, 6. We do that one. Oh, good. We're definitely coming back to 4. We might even hold 4 until next class period because it's deep. Let's finish all these other ones first. Yeah, do you remember right? Yeah, let's finish these other ones first to feel really good about the concept. So, at number 5, it says, suppose the position of a particle is given by that function. So, as always, what does that look like? It's a cubic. So we would expect it to do something like this, but it probably does something more like that. So in order to really know what we're talking about, you'd want to look at it. All right. And And I was totally wrong. Look at what this graph does. It doesn't go up and then down and then up, it just goes up. Right? Now, am I sure? I'd have to zoom out. Now, here's an interesting philosophical question. How far do I have to zoom out before I know for sure that it's not going to dip back down and go back up?
A while.
Well, how long is a while? I mean, if I just keep here zooming, how long do I have to keep zooming before we all feel convinced that it's not about to dip back down and go up again?
Like
2 minutes,
3 seconds.
3 seconds?
That works for me.
Well, what would it mean if it dipped and went back up again?
There's here.
Well, I just mean like if the graph really did go like that, what would we expect to find?
Flat spots.
We'd expect to find flat spots. So zooming out, you could zoom out forever and still not know for sure. Maybe it's just the next zoom, you'll find it. Whereas in this particular graph, what's the function? Is anyone tell me? Oh, 5x cubed plus 3x plus 9?
Yes.
Now see, we don't have to keep zooming to convince ourselves. We can just take the derivative and set it equal to 0 and see if there's any flat spots. So I'm going to take the derivative, which is just 15x squared plus 3, and I'm going to set that equal to 0. So I move the 3 over. 15x squared equals negative 3. Then divide up to 15. Oops, squared. So that's x squared is equal to negative 3/15, which is negative a fifth. And then I square root both sides. And what's the square root of negative 5? I'm sorry, what's the square root of negative a fifth? It's an imaginary. And so where are the flat spots? There aren't any. Yeah, imaginary, exactly right. So we just proved that no matter how far you zoom, it's never going to dip down and go back up again. So really what we see is what we have. And we can feel very convinced of that now because there are no flat spots. It just goes up and up and up and up and up. So that was interesting. See, that was a neat use of calculus to prove something to ourselves. That no matter how far you zoom out, the graph is never going to dip down and then dip back up again. And we know that for sure. Okay, so if that's what our graph looks like, not very exciting, what do they want us to find? First of all, you can make a sketch. What did it do? It went. Now you notice this is still calculusly interesting. Because if I go over to the left, what's the concavity? Concave down on the left. It's technically concave down. But to the right, what is it? Concave up. So there was an inflection point. Even though there's no flat spot, there was an inflection point where it is slightly concave to the right. Sorry, concave up to the right, but concave down to the left. So I've got negative concavity over here, positive concavity over here, which means if I would have done the second derivative and solved for 0, I would get an answer. So let's look. If I now take the second derivative, now that's just 30x. Set that equal to 0, x equals 0. So actually there is an inflection point at x equals 0. There is a point where concavity changes from negative concavity to positive concavity, and yet it's not a flat spot, which is interesting because you asked that earlier. Could you have an inflection point where the slope is not 0? And yes, you can, and we did. Okay, so all that said, I know Mr. G, do the problem. Do the problem. We haven't even done the problem yet. All right, find the velocity function. You just take the derivative. So everybody remember, if you have f and then f prime and then f double prime, that is the same definitionally as s, which is distance, v, which is velocity, and a, which is acceleration. So physics uses the letter s for distance. It's unfortunate. They could use the letter d, but they didn't use the letter s. V for velocity, a for acceleration, s for position or distance. So if they want the velocity, what do we have to find? We just take the first derivative. So the first derivative, I already did it over there on the right, but it's 15t squared plus 3. Okay, there's our velocity function. Find the velocity at time t equals 3. So v of 3 is 15 times 3 squared plus 3, which is 9 times 15, which is something, plus 3. 138? Very good. So that's meters per second. So the velocity at time 3 is 138 meters per second. Now find the acceleration. Acceleration is simply the second derivative. So we take the derivative again. So that's 30t. And we plug in 3 again. So the acceleration at 3 is 30, 3, which is 9. Yes, that is a error. That it should be meters per second squared. Yeah, that's acceleration. Now you'll notice the one thing we didn't compute was the actual position at time equals 3. If I plug 3 into the original function, then 3 cubed, that's a lot. We'll just say 500. No, I'm kidding.
27.
Did you get it? What was it?
No, I was just saying 3 cubes.
Oh yeah, so 27 times 5 plus 9 plus 9. I got 153. So what I'd like you all to notice then about this graph, we can still make a little sketch. We could say to ourselves, the function at 3 is positive, the derivative at 3 is positive, and the second derivative at 3 is positive. All 3 gave us a positive answer, which means if I go to 3, my coordinate would be up here, my slope would be positive, my concavity would be positive. And does that match what was happening? Over to the right there? Yeah. Now I have to admit that when you do curve sketching, there's a lot of flexibility. You don't even need to know what the number is. You just have to know it's positive, negative, or 0. And in this particular function, since those are all positive, for sure the function value has to be positive, right? Like if we're plugging in a positive number 3, then for sure the function itself is positive. If I take the derivative, all those numbers still say positive. So the derivative will also be positive. And if I take the derivative again, the numbers all still say positive. So now I know the second derivative is also positive. I could have known those results by just looking at the original function. And just saying, well, all the derivatives are going to be positive. And so that's what my little sketch would look like. It doesn't mean you shouldn't find the numbers. It's just a way of kind of checking your work and knowing what you're talking about. Okay, so that's a velocity acceleration problem. Number 6. Questions before we move on? I believe this is another. Yeah, let that be the equation for a motion of a particle. Find the function for velocity. Where does the velocity equal 0? Well, this is a fun one. And then find the function for the acceleration. So again, notice it's SVA. So position, velocity, acceleration. So we could go ahead and compute velocity and acceleration really quickly by just taking derivatives. So what's our velocity? 12t squared minus 48t is 36. And let's go ahead and compute our acceleration. We just take the derivative again. So 44t minus 48. Are those our formulas for velocity and acceleration? Now, I want you to notice that this question, there's only one other question it's asking. And when is the velocity 0? But I'd like to ask a bigger question. When is the position 0? When is the velocity 0? When is the acceleration 0? Because that's what we originally, I wrote it down over here on the side. It's not there anymore. But I was asking, when is f of x equals 0? What does that mean? What is f prime of x equals 0? What does that mean? What is f double prime of x equals 0? What does that mean? So let's just look at those real quick. So we can find all 3 answers by just looking at the graph. I'll let us cheat real quick. 4x cubed minus 24x squared plus 36x. So where is this? When is it equal to 0? So first of all, when's one place it's equal to 0?
0.
At time 0. So your position at time 0 is 0, meaning you're starting at home. Wherever home is, you're at home. And then, if you watch, you leave home, you move away from home, and then eventually you turn around and you head back to home, and you get back home at time equals 3. And then you leave home again, and you leave forever. Right? So that's what this graph says, where f of x equals 0 means when are you at home? Because we're saying this is distance from your house. Okay? So we all now know the answer that, let's write that down, that the original function, which I don't have written down. What was the original function? 4t cubed minus 24t squared plus 36t. So that equals 0 when t equals 0 and 3. And what that means is you're at home. So at time 0 and 3, you're at home. Now, what's the next question? The next question is saying, okay, now let's look at the first derivative, which represents velocity. So when is your velocity equal to 0? Now, what does that mean if your velocity is 0? So notice right here, you're leaving home. You leave home rather quickly. And then, right then, your velocity went to 0, right? Because you have to turn around. Anytime you're turning around, your velocity suddenly goes to 0. So that's one time your velocity is 0. And then you get home, you grab a snack and leave. But at that moment, you stopped, grabbed a snack, and then you left again. So when was our velocity equal to 0? At that point and at that point, which again is just the flat spot of the original function. So where are those points? That's at t equals 1, and at t equals 3. So now we can say that our velocity is equal to 0 when t equals 1 and 3. So then the last question would be, when is your acceleration equal to 0? Because we can set this equal to 0 now and solve it. So if I just do a little bit of algebra here, when is, oh, sorry, that's A. When is our acceleration function equal to 0? 24t equals 48. So t equals 2. So at t equals 2, our acceleration is 0. Now, but keep in mind, f double prime, when is the second derivative equal to 0? That's an inflection point. So they're saying that we have an inflection point at t equals 2. I want to make that inflection point very obvious to you. So I'm going to fix my window. My goodness, you spend so much time fixing windows, don't you? I am talking about PCs. All right. I'm a Mac guy myself. So there, do we all agree that that's the inflection point at 2? Looks pretty good. I mean, it's concave down to the left. It's concave up to the right. The inflection point is at 2. Okay, well, visually, that's the whole problem. We didn't actually do any algebra yet, did we?
No.
We just did a derivative, and we got all the information off of the graph. There's only one problem they asked us to do algebraically, and that was, where does the velocity equal 0? So everybody take your velocity function, which is 12t squared minus 48t plus 36. And how do we solve that? Yeah, they gave us an hint, factor out the GCF, which is what? Factor out of 12. So if I factor out of 12, now I have t squared minus 4t plus 3. What do you do with the 12? What's the 12? Yeah, divide the 12 off. And if you divide the 12 off, it's just gone, right? It's gone. And that's totally equal to 0. And then you? And then you factor. So what multiplies to make 3 that adds to make negative 4? 3 and 1. Yeah, 3 and 1. Which, by the zero product rule, if this times this equals 0, then one of those has to be 0. So t equals 3 or t equals 1. Which is the answer that we got by looking at the graph. That was the location of the flat spots. So in this problem, we could have done this whole problem without ever looking at the graph, right? But the graph was pretty compelling. The graph was very compelling because it went like that. Oh, nope, it didn't go like that. It actually touched down, didn't it? So now we can take, if you haven't already made a sketch, do it with me now. We have a graph that goes like this. And so what did we find? These points are when you're at home. So you're at home at t equals 0 and 3. And then we found, when is your velocity equal 0? Your velocity was 0 there and there. So let's see, that was 0. This is 3. This is 1. So you've got flat spots. So velocity is 0 at t equals 1 and 3. And then we had acceleration was 0 at our inflection point, which was at 2. So it would be interesting to label all that. Right here, your velocity is 0. Right here, your velocity is 0. Right here, your acceleration is 0. By labeling all that so you can see how it all fits together is very helpful. Velocity 0 is flat spots. Acceleration 0 is inflection points. And position 0, s equals 0, is when you're back home again. Yep. Well, that's a lot. We said a whole lot in that problem. You might be saying, well, gee, to do the problem online, all I got to do is take two derivatives and then set the second one equal to 0 and solve it and I'll be done, right? But it's nice to have this deeper understanding of what all is happening. So what do we have then? We have 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. These are all just graph problems. They actually go really fast. So let's see if we can go ahead and do these graphical problems in the last 3 minutes. And then we're going to save number 4 for when you come in next. So you don't have to look at number 4. You don't have to do number 4. And when you go online, please don't try number 4. I don't want you to feel frustrated. I mean, if you want to try it, you can. But I definitely want to give you guidance. I'm not trying to throw you to the wolves. I want to show you how to do it. It's just a long problem, and I thought we could do these first. Okay. So this is a fun question. In number 7, it says match each function with its graph. So one of these graphs is the original function, one of the graphs is the first derivative, and one of the graphs is the second derivative. Which is which is which?
The green one is
The green one is the original? What makes you say that?
it's like by that.
Maybe. Maybe. Well, I have a really fun tip for you, and that is that as you take a derivative, the exponent decreases each time. So, like, first of all, we can go ahead and just look right here and just go ahead and say, this straight line blue one is mx plus b, and the green one is a parabola, so that's x squared, and the red one, it must be a cubic, because it goes up and then down and then back up again. So what do we notice about our exponents on x? It's x to the 1, x to the 2, x to the 3. And, you know, the equations are more complex than that, but it is an x squared graph, and that is an x cubed graph, and that's just an x graph. So what I want you to notice is that when you start a power function at x cubed, what happens to your exponent every time you take the derivative? It decreases. So the first derivative would become 3x squared, and then the next derivative would become 6x. And so what you notice is that as you take derivatives of power functions, the exponent decreases. There's another way of thinking about this. When you're taking derivatives of power functions, an x cubed is very curvy. A parabola is just curvy, whereas a straight line is not curvy. So what happens to the curviness of your function as you take derivatives? It becomes less and less curvy, or it becomes more straight. So if you take a function and it's like, wada! And then you start taking derivatives, then generally speaking, over time, that thing will become less and less curvy until finally it straightens out. That's just power functions, okay? We're only talking about if it's a power function, which these are. So with all power functions, the process of taking derivatives straightens out your graph. So that goes ahead and tells us right away that what's our original function? The most curvy one. And what's the second derivative? The straightest one. So all that said, which one is the original function? The red one, because it's the most curvy. And then which one is the least curvy? The bluest. So that must be the second derivative. Whereas the green one is in between curviness. Does that work? Again, that's only power functions. Other functions, you can take derivatives forever, and it will stay just as curvy. But power functions, the curviness goes away. Oh, I guess I have to stop talking. I really wish our class could keep going. Yeah, it's time to go. All right, well, no biggie. There's just a couple more problems at the end here that are conceptual. If you want to look at them, you can. But no matter what, save number 4, and I will do number 8, 9, 10 with you when you come back. All right? I don't think there's anything else to talk about, right? Today's Tuesday. We'll see you on Thursday. Everything's good? I'll give you your tests. I bet you would like that. If you took your test at the testing center, I'm going to go pick it up right now, and then I can give it back to you on next class. Here's Molly. Here's Josh. Here's Henry. Here's Fernando. Here's Colleen. Sarah's good. And Jared. Okay. See ya.